All right. Nice to see you all again. Seems that most of you have joined, so we can start. Hello, and welcome to our East African webinar series, part 2. My name is Pechter, and I am project manager in Enterprise Estonia. Today is our second stop of planned 3 webinars, and we will learn more about Kenya. And like last time, we have guests from Stepchange Africa to give us the overview. But before that, I will encourage you to ask actively questions in the Q&A section, so we can have more interaction during this webinar. But now, actually, without further ado, Dr. Andrew, if you are ready, then the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tonis. I'd like, on behalf of Stepchange Africa, to thank Enterprise Estonia for the opportunity to partner with you in this very important webinar, part of the series. I also warmly welcome all the participants who have joined this webinar. I am Ssemwanga, one of the co-founders and managing partner in Stepchange Africa. I will talk more about myself and about Stepchange Africa in a few minutes. In this webinar, we are going to be 3 presenters, myself and Andrew Herweg, who is also a co-founding member of Stepchange Africa and also managing partner. We are going to have a guest speaker by the name of Grace Mothoni Njoroge, who is a lead partner in Growth Shield Africa. She will take us through the regulatory framework in Kenya. And the purpose of this webinar is to expose you to opportunities that are available in Kenya, which is part of East Africa. Let me take you through the agenda for today. As you can see, this webinar is organized by both the Enterprise Estonia and Stepchange Africa. I'll be giving you an overview of opportunities in Kenya, but the real meat will be led by Andrew. Andrew is going to give you specific opportunities that exist in Kenya. And of course, Grace will also tell us the framework in terms of regulations in Kenya. As we move towards the end of the webinar, I will give you some steps that are vital for succeeding doing business in Kenya. And then I'll also give you contacts, both from the private and public sector, that you can liaise with for moving forward. As Tonis has said, please ask questions and we shall be able to answer them. Thank you. Let me talk about the presenters. I will start with myself. I am Ssemwanga. I am based in Uganda, which is part of East Africa. And for the last close to 40 years, I've been involved as a senior manager in both the private and public sector, in charge of finance. So I've been involved in clearing and forwarding company. I've been involved in hotel and catering. I've also been in agriculture as well as insurance as a senior manager in charge of identifying funds, controlling funds, and also allocating funds. In 2005, I crossed over to the higher education sector as a senior lecturer in Makerere University, and later on led 2 universities as vice chancellor, St. Lawrence University and Cavendish University, Uganda. Alongside, I've been an independent consultant for the World Bank, for the European Union, for the European University Association, for the Association of African Universities, and for other countries. And I've worked in a number of countries: Nigeria, Zimbabwe, South Sudan, Ethiopia, and also in the Pacific. And I've also visited a number of countries in Europe, Asia, the Pacific, Latin America, and the US. Now, my background is in corporate governance, the organizing of boards, and also in finance, accounting, institution evaluation, and higher education. Let me also talk about my friend, Andrew. Andrew is, as you can see, an expert in business development and marketing, strategy, and also in building partnerships. He has worked in a number of countries, both in Europe and the US. And more interesting, he has had work in East Africa as a manager, senior manager in the manufacturing sector, in marketing, and so on. So his background with East Africa is very, very vital in our company at Stepchange Africa. Last but not least is our friend Grace, who is going to take us through the regulations regarding business in Kenya. She's an expert in legal matters and finance and accounting, and she's the lead partner in Gold Shield Africa, which provides business services, advisory services, and legal services. So that's the team that is going to be with you throughout this webinar. Let me give you an overview of Kenya. Kenya is part of East Africa, as you already know. But very interesting, Kenya is the economic powerhouse of East Africa. We look at Kenya as our father in East Africa because of the trade, because of the economic strength. As you can see from the figures, population is also high, 47 million, and they speak 2 languages. Of course, they have other languages, but these are the main languages, Swahili and English. And what is interesting, the English language here is at a higher level. And like in other parts of Africa, the comprehension is very, very high. I'm told it's the best English speaking country in Africa. So if you go there, you have no problem speaking with the nationals. They speak very good English. Nairobi is the capital city. It's close to 4.2 million people. But it's very interesting that Kenya, apart from having Nairobi as a capital city, is also having other good cities, very big cities. For example, Mombasa, at the coast, is close to 1 million people. It's close to 1 million people. Another city is Kisumu, close to 700,000 people. So unlike other countries in East Africa, which have got cities, the cities there are smaller. Cities in Nairobi, in Kenya, are bigger, and therefore they support Nairobi. They're big cities which support Nairobi. And Nairobi, as you see from Andrew, is having a lot of activities going on from the political side, from the economic side, and also social sides. So we're going to hear more about Nairobi and about Kenya when we get into the specifics. The currency is the the Kenyan shilling, which is very stable, and we believe it's convertible to other currencies. And that makes it very good for trading. So this Nairobi or Kenya is the major trade hub for the entire East Africa. And that's very interesting for business and investment. In terms of GDP, we are now looking at the key performance indicators. And when you look at the GDP for Kenya, 79 billion. 79 billion is twice the GDP for Uganda. That makes it the powerhouse. It's twice what we saw for Uganda. The growth rate is 5%, and it will grow possibly to 6% when we get more agricultural products because of the rainfall, and when we get more production from manufacturing, when these companies recover from COVID. So we expect the growth rate to be higher than 5%. Kenya is a middle-income country. As you can see, the GDP per capita is more than $1,000, which is the normal figure for a middle-class economy. So they're above 1.5 K. So this is very interesting, and that creates purchasing power. You know, the more the GDP per capita, the more purchasing power. That means when you produce goods, you are able to sell them in the market. People have got the money to buy those goods. So they can buy necessities as well as other goods. So that's very good news for business if the purchasing power is there. Inflation is a single digit, and that's very good. And I hope it will go down, as I've indicated, because of the rains. When the rains come, and we are now in the rainy season, so there will be more production in the agricultural sector, as well as manufacturing, and the prices will go down. Let us see more about the other indicators in terms of rates. The VAT is at 16%, which is within the range for other East African countries. Same for the social security rate, which is 10% that we saw for Uganda. So it is within a range for the East African countries. The exchange rate is 107 Kenyan shillings per dollar, which is quite a strong exchange rate compared to other countries. You've heard of countries like Zimbabwe, where you have to go with a wheelbarrow of money to get $1. So this is a very good rate. Corporate tax rate of 30% is within the range as for the other East African countries. Let us continue with the trade now. We are very much interested in knowing what's happening between Kenya and the European Union. As you can see, the exports almost reached $1 billion in 2019. Exports from Kenya to the EU, 988 million euros. So that's quite a good figure. And what are these exports made of? These exports are made of mostly by agricultural products. As you can see, flowers is the leading export in Kenya, followed by tea, coffee, avocados, and so on. So the exports from Kenya to the EU are basically agricultural products. Now, what is interesting is that the color which is in blue is what they have managed to export to the EU. But the margin in gray color means that there are still opportunities to export more goods. So if you invest in agriculture in Kenya, there is still market for your produce, because what is now being sold to the EU is not enough. There are more opportunities to sell more products from Kenya to the EU. Thank you. Let us look at the side of exports from the EU to Kenya. As you can see, the figure is 1.6 billion. Of course, we have more exports from the EU to Kenya than the imports. There's a bit of a deficit there. And as you can see, most of these exports from the EU are of medicines. So medicines is the leading import in Kenya from the EU. Of course, they have the wheat, the vehicles, the vaccines, and of course, the tractors. Again, as you can see, there are still opportunities to explore in terms of exports from the EU to Kenya. You see that the gray gap means that the market is there, but there is still more to be exported to Kenya. So business people can take advantage of that because the market is there. The market is there. All these items, you can see those gaps. Dear friends, let us now move to the specifics. Let us move to the specifics. And later on, I will talk about Stepchange Africa. But now let us go to the specifics. And I request Andrew to take us through this section on the specifics. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Andrew, for that. So hello, everyone in the audience today. My name is Andrew Herweg, and as my colleague, Dr. Andrew, pointed out, I'm one of the co-founders and managing partners of Stepchange Africa. So a little bit more about myself. Before Stepchange, I was an entrepreneur for several years, working across the manufacturing, ICT, agriculture sectors, in Rwanda, Uganda, and Kenya for long periods of time. Part of organizations which up to 150 employees, moving millions of dollars a year, to just small, sort of scrappy startups. So what I'm going to do over the next 20, 30 minutes is take you through specific sector opportunities, as well as give you a little bit more insight on my personal experiences of doing business in Kenya. And hopefully this provides you with sort of a roadmap, an idea about if you're looking to expand your startup, SME, or just go as a solo entrepreneur in expanding opportunities into Kenya. The first sector we're going to jump into is ICT. So looking at Kenya as a whole, it's really a hotbed for innovation. So much so, it was ranked 3rd in the most recent Global Innovation Index. So what does that actually mean? in terms of high quality universities, in terms of the number of innovation hubs, which I believe there's 50 plus of them, in terms of the amount of capital being raised by technology-based organizations, it's quite extraordinary. In terms of the financing element, in terms of venture capital, Kenyan tech startups actually raised 191 million US dollars last year. And that's quite impressive because Kenya received a lion's share of the investment for the overall continent. So Kenya is quote unquote part of the overall big four. The big four is composed of Kenya, Nigeria, Egypt, and South Africa. Going to specific opportunities within ICT, first, let's take a look at agriculture. Where we see a lot of opportunity is coming particularly through the B2B marketplaces, essentially working everywhere from the smallholder farmers to the fork. In terms of this sector, you do see some names such as Twiga pop up. This is a company that has raised tens of millions of dollars to date. They're an organization that has just actually as only a small share of the overall piece of the pie. And that remaining sort of piece of the pie is completely untouched. The opportunity is going a little bit more into the B2B marketplace is actually making sure there's consistent inventory into local shops. So those little street corners that you see to actually sort of more chain restaurants that you see such as Java House. Two, on the other side, working with farmers as well, particularly farmers in the overall sort of deal and sort of commodity trading process. They tend to sort of receive very low rates. So just the application of ICT technologies can really help democratize and provide a lot better returns and assist businesses in order to enhance their overall operations. Another opportunity in terms of the ag ICT space is looking at farm inputs. Once again, these are marketplaces, whether you're looking at the hybridization of seeds to you're looking for actual farm equipment. There's a lot of green space into it. Particularly if you're looking to connect people beyond outside of Nairobi too. Moving to the next part is financial services. So financial services in Kenya is quite advanced. And what do I mean by that? So in terms of the consumer lending space, there's actually over 120 consumer lenders. But with that being said, it's still really much at its sort of early stages in terms of development. In terms of creating other types of products, such as insurance-based products, that's a really unique opportunity, particularly as a lot of the legacy banks are not really investing in insurance offerings, because right now they just yield sort of very little return for the banks today. So there's a lot of sort of quote unquote white space in that field. Another area we're seeing a lot of opportunity for businesses, particularly tapping into consumer lending, SME lending. Right now, it's a little bit difficult in terms of, I would say, an SME, so the local shops that you do see, whether in their local communities in Eldoret or they're somewhere in Nairobi or up in Wajir. It's one of the things there, the access to capital is a bit limiting for particularly sort of investments. If you can hit that sweet spot, maybe between 10,000 to 50,000, there's a lot of opportunity for you to come in and sort of make a difference. And in terms of these financial services, these are all being offered via sort of mobile applications. And last but not least is salary advances. In terms of salary advances, huge opportunity. What do we mean by that? Just sharing my personal experiences. The overall consistent cash flow is challenging running a business, not only in Kenya, but also in several other countries. People are just not very good payers, unfortunately. That will change over time. But overall, particularly, you'll have staff that will have to need their payment on the end of the month, just paying on the 30th of each month or the 1st. And the challenge is that how do you actually sort of manage that as a business? And actually, how do you provide that extra capital forward? So in terms of like public sector payroll advances, you have a group called the Finclusion Group that's just doing work quite extensively in Kenya. And that's actually run by a large sort of Dutch team. But particularly going into private sector public advances, that's a whole entire industry that's very sort of ready to be sort of tapped into. Looking at healthcare, healthcare is sort of a sector not only in Kenya, but across the world has received a lot more sort of focus, particularly due to COVID over the last sort of year to 15 months. And what we're seeing particularly in Kenya is a lot of developments in terms of diagnostics. And this is what I'm talking about is at-home diagnostics. And this is not only an opportunity, what you're seeing in the cities as Nairobi and Mombasa, but particularly if you can tap into more rural communities, as that's where a vast amount of the Kenyans actually live. Another area to look forward to is pharmaceutical deliveries. So this one, once again, very early stages in terms of development. Right now, the organizations involved in pharmaceutical deliveries are the likes of Jumia, essentially a typical delivery service. It's not very intelligent. It's essentially bringing a product from one place to another. You are seeing a handful of companies such as Elara Health looking at pharmaceutical deliveries, but they're adding a little bit more, I would say, intelligence into it. They're actually having a medical doctor actually travel with the delivery to actually provide consultations at the same time. So once again, a lot of challenge, a lot of opportunities to build upon sort of a very non-assistant environment. And two other areas is telemedicine and medical records. Telemedicine, right now, you're really just doing something like this, something video. In terms of actually adding a whole entire value suite of products, it's still a lot of opportunity for development. And then for the electronic medical records, there is a big push in terms of data privacy. That's not something that's been very popular in the previous 30 plus years, but over the last 5 years, you've seen a lot of push towards that. So there's a lot of pressure on not only city clinics and private clinics, but also public clinics and rural clinics to adapt accordingly. And from that particular perspective, you're actually seeing a lot of investment come from various aid organizations and also development finance institutions. Then last but not least, just hitting on the education side. Education, similar to healthcare, as children and young adults have been prevented from going to school, how do you actually continue on providing sort of quality access to educational materials when they can't actually be in the classroom? So with the likes of Kenya, it's a very sophisticated economy. There's very high mobile penetration rates. So you see a lot of educational services being sort of driven by sort of mobile services. In particular, what you're seeing a lot of this is sort of a combination of services from smartphones, but also feature phones. Particularly if you can leverage sort of USSD, that's quite interesting because you can reach a lot more Kenyans and it'll actually be a lot more affordable. A unique organization that's really been able to capture on that. It's called Ineza Education. At the end of the day, I think they have about a little over 1 million users. But as Dr. Andrew said, there's 47 million inhabitants, and a vast majority of that is under the age of 19. So it tells you that there's Ineza Education, and there's a lot more room for competition and sort of further growth in the sphere. Another thing is you're just looking at the overall development of sort of educational programs. And you have a company called Gidalto that focuses on skills-based after-school learning. So right now you're seeing a lot of sort of focus towards sort of elementary schools, but in terms of looking at secondary and tertiary education, how to sort of leverage digital technologies to build up the education, there's a lot more things that can be done in terms of it. And that's where we see at Stepchange Africa, a lot of areas of growth. And just the last thing to point out here on this particular slide is basically the percentage of number of internet users is skyrocketing. And this is sort of a great trend that you can use to capitalize on as you look to build and grow your business in Kenya. The second sector I'm going to jump into is agriculture. In terms of agriculture, it's a critical sector for the country. So much so, President Uhuru Kenyatta created what he called the Big Four agenda, which agriculture is a huge part of it. It falls under sort of the headline of food security. Just laying the scene a little bit further with agriculture. Unfortunately, as terms of the dry seasons, there are chronic food shortages in more sort of arid regions across the country. Also, due to climate change with droughts, and then it's probably what you saw over the sort of the last year or so with locusts, it is a bit challenging. But with all of those challenges, that means there's a lot of opportunity for you members of the audience to sort of come into Kenya, partner with local organizations and build out teams in order to sort of help better mitigate these risks. And then just putting sort of the overall impact of agriculture into perspective is that more than half of Kenyans are involved in the agricultural sphere. And it actually accounts for almost a third of the overall GDP for Kenya. Looking at specific opportunities for attendees today, we can really break it down to 3 particular sections. The first part is looking at the agro-processing, and this is the value add of various products. Particularly, as my colleague said, Dr. Andrew, tea and coffee are very high-grade products, but there's a lot of opportunity for you to better sort of cater to I would say, European and other types of palettes. And something that we didn't mention earlier is that actually the European Union is the biggest export market for Kenya. So actually a little bit about 21% of exports from Kenya do land within the EU. So there's a sort of already a wide amount of acceptance and knowledge of the Kenyan-based products that are available across the continent. Just going into a little bit more detail into value add. Particularly what we're seeing at Stepchange Africa is a lot of opportunity within nuts, particularly macadamia nuts. And with the sort of the changing habits and sort of demand for sort of more unique products, what we're seeing particularly in the European Union is a slow increase, but gradual increase in terms of macadamia nut oil. So for you as an organization, being able to come down and work with local farmers, mechanize and invest in the overall operations, there's a really good opportunity for you to capitalize on growing sort of consumer behavior in Europe by providing value-add products. Next is looking at storage. Storage is a very challenging part of doing business, particularly when you go into fast-moving consumer goods and you're also in the food and beverage industry. Overall in Kenya, but also across East Africa and the whole entire continent, cold chain supply, site storage and warehousing is a huge issue. It's a part where I'm talking about actually sort of fixed freezers, which you get at major hotels, to small restaurants, to actually sort of refrigerated trucks, and particularly ones and organizations that actually have the right sort of qualifications in order to carry those products too. In terms of storage, there's a refrigeration. There's one company that comes to mind, and that's Inspire Farms. It's actually led by an Italian contingent. And what they do is they create bespoke refrigerators for mainly a lot of hotels and sort of larger size farms. What they do is they have work across East Africa, but it's one of the things that what they're tapping into is only a small amount of answering a question to a large, sort of much larger, bigger problem. So it's one of the things that if this is something of interest for you, us at Stepchange Africa, we're happy to sit down with you and talk about this a lot more in further detail, similar to the other areas that I've raised during the presentation. Also in terms of value chain, also you can see the likes of how can you sort of leverage ICT technology playing into agriculture and also agro-processing. There's a really cool company called Zaidi, which is a Finnish American Kenyan organization that looks at the value chain and sort of working with people at the bottom of the pyramid and helping them sort of access quality milk for it. So it's one of the things you just can look at value-added products, not only for people at the middle and upper class, but also for the lower economic stratas as well. And something to point out, which I forgot to point out earlier, is that when you're looking at more of the startup scene, that tends where you tend to find a lot of sort of foreign nationals or foreign migrants, however you want to be coined. You usually tend to see them come to Kenya and sort of build out a product and use Kenya as its sandbox, build local teams and grow their product. You tend not to see too many sort of Estonian startups and European startups overall really come into and then sort of just build out. It's usually individuals that have an idea and they're just using sort of the great environment Kenya has to build out their team, their product, and sort of hopefully build on success. Then the last part is we're looking at fish. What's unique about Kenya is because, of course, it has a coastline. That means there's already consumer behavior and there's a lot of demand and there's a palate for fish compared to where Uganda, it's a little bit more challenging. What we're seeing in terms of fish is sort of the slow burn in terms of the development of a lot of sort of aquaculture projects, particularly aquaponics. Aquaponics provides a huge opportunity because it's a lot more inexpensive in the long run. Additionally, it's great for urban and rural settings as well. So it's a unique opportunity, particularly as you're trying to tap into circular economies as well. We're seeing that there's a lot of opportunity. And in terms of that, there's just a handful of people across the continent that are even sort of slowly developing in this space. So plenty of white space for you guys to jump in. Also just tapping into the fish side of things, there's feed mills and also fish processing industries. Something just to raise to you, particularly if you're looking at frozen fish. Unfortunately, there are some challenges within that sphere, particularly the Chinese. The Chinese can bring sort of frozen fish fillet and actually sell it at a cheaper price than what's created locally. So it's just something just to be aware of. So being a smart entrepreneur, or businessman or businesswoman, just make sure you are being intelligent and really understand sort of the dynamics and what could potentially undercut your business, but what can also create a unique opportunity for you as well. And the third sector I'm going to go in today is manufacturing. So once again, manufacturing is actually a key part of the overall Big Four agenda. This agenda is really sort of laying out sort of a near-term, medium-term plan for the overall country and its growth to evolve from a sort of lower middle-income country into a middle-income country. In terms of the manufacturing industry as a whole, it's actually been an industry that's been quite neglected for extensive periods of time. So that's why there's such an emphasis on building out the manufacturing sector in Kenya. Overall, the country is aiming to increase it to be from 9.2% to 15% of GDP by 2022. That is forecasted. The likelihood of hitting that number is probably not likely, but this just goes to show you that there is a focus and action being taken in order to upscale the overall manufacturing industries in the country. Also, in terms of it, it's not only sort of building up the capacity of it, but also increasing the number of individuals involved in the sectors. And also to be included is they're trying to actually increase drastically the FDI inflows to it. So it's one of the things for European businesses looking to go into Kenya. Manufacturing is ripe for opportunity. Looking at specific opportunities, you could break this down into three particular areas. The first is sort of textiles, apparels, and leather. What we're seeing is a number of sort of cooperatives that are sort of cooperatives of artisans working together to make really handcrafted products, particularly in the leather sphere, or sort of the leather industry, as well as other types of apparels. And what they're missing right now, particularly, is really that access to machinery and sort of the overall to ramp up their production, because a lot of their products right now, they're focused more on the higher end in terms of tourists who are visiting there on holiday, but also upper class Kenyans. What they're trying to do is pivot a little bit more to the middle class because there's a lot more opportunity. It's also sort of, you're reaching more tens of millions of people. But right now, because they lack a lot of machinery and a lot of sort of technical know-how, the ability to drop their costs is not very possible at this time. So it's something that there's a remedy is definitely needed to in order to help start changing that. Going into the second bullet point in the section is heavy industries. The heavy industries, you're looking at talking about the oil, gas, and the mining side. These types of industries, similar to other parts of the world, Africa, these tend to be dominated by larger brands, particularly when you look at like the Total Group out of France. Within these particular industries, they tend to be very capital intensive. So that's why the government of Kenya is looking to form sort of JV agreements with a number of different players in the sphere. If you're wondering sort of what is the opportunity, really, particularly going beyond sort of the exploration and production, it's still very early days. There's only been recent discoveries in the last handful of years, or discoveries have been around for a long period of time, but they've never been really taken advantage of. It just right now, it's just becoming more of a critical focus of the government. So there's a lot more impetus to finally sort of take advantage of what the natural resources that are available in Kenya. And the last part we're getting into is sort of the ICT and services. And what do I mean by that is more like the fixed hard stuff. This is something for the production of phones, laptops, TVs. 95% of these products are all imported. Nothing is made in Kenya. So it's one of the things where there's a huge demand for these products, but a lot of these products are coming from the Middle East, they're coming from China. So the ability to actually, if you can produce in country and particularly bring the price point down for at least competitive below, I'd say between $50 to $100 per device at retail, there's a lot of opportunity for you to be hopefully quite successful in the longer run. And as you can see, there's the Mara logo here. So that is a British East African brand. And so what they did, they started producing a number of phones and they're looking to export across East Africa. They actually have a production factory in Rwanda, but it's one of the things they're looking to tap into the Kenya market. This goes to show you that there's still plenty of opportunities to make sort of high quality or decent quality electronic goods if you can keep it at an affordable price. And yeah, that's, as said before, that we've gone over these three particular sectors, that a lot of these sort of manufacturing, ICT, and agricultural industries, they're really only at a step one over overall 10-step process. So there's a lot of room for innovation and partnership coming from Estonia. So looking across the country, we just identified 4 particular areas just to provide a little more context if you're not sort of very familiar with Kenya. If you look up into the northwest part of the country, you're looking at Turkana County. That's where you're going to get a lot of the oil and gas and a lot of infrastructure projects happening. This is one of the more poor parts of the country. So infrastructure is still very poor in terms of looking at the roads, in terms of airfields out there. It's not great, but it's slowly improving. But yeah, it's something to be aware of. If you look at the Rift Valley, that's where you get the hotbed of agriculture in terms of the tea, coffee, tobacco, and other items. And you're also seeing development of smaller scale manufacturing. It's a little bit cheaper to manufacture there compared to doing within the confines of Nairobi. And then Nairobi is, everything needs to pass through Nairobi. Nairobi has the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, which has easy connections to Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and other parts of Africa. Also, something to note that Nairobi is actually the financial capital for the whole entire region. So that's where you get a lot of access to the financial services. And this is where all the major offices are, and this is where the government departments are based. So it's one of the things where from a private-public partnership perspective, all roads go through Nairobi. And then jumping over to the coast with Mombasa, as my colleague Dr. Andrew said, Mombasa has a population of a little over 1 million people. Infrastructure is in terms of the port, great opportunity. Nice thing about being in Kenya, if you're looking to export import, costs are cheaper as you're closer to the coast. Mombasa has has the largest deep water port in the country, so that's, or sorry, in the region. So it's one of the things that the cost of bringing goods into the country and out of the country is a little bit cheaper in some aspects, but also depends on the type of goods that you're trying to move as well. And there's also sort of ripe opportunities for small scale manufacturing, which you tend to get for prices in terms of land and rentals. It's a lot more affordable than what you would get compared to Nairobi. So that was just a breakdown of all of the opportunities. So now I just want to give you a little bit more practical sense of sort of the challenges and opportunities of doing business in Kenya. As I said before, I've worked in Kenya for a number of years. So this is just sort of things that I've picked up as well as my colleagues and other counterparts that we know, just to give you sort of hopefully a truthful and honest take of the lay of the land of doing business in Kenya. So let's look first above the surface. Well, we told you before, it's a major trade hub for Eastern Africa because you have the port of Mombasa, you have the major airports in Nairobi, but also they have the SGR network, which is the train that connects Mombasa to Nairobi, which also goes, of course, through central Kenya as well. And they have over 150 airfields across the country. So if you have an access to a plane with it, you can easily get to parts of the country via air. And sometimes that's actually the easiest way to travel, particularly if you're looking to go to more rural parts of the country. Also, what you see is really high mobile penetration rates and market sophistication. What do we mean by market sophistication is you have very high digital literacy rates, you have high literacy rates overall. In terms of quality of education, in terms of elementary, secondary, and tertiary, it tends to be the best in Kenya for the East African community. Jumping over the challenges side, which you probably could already tell to date if you've been there or just doing some basic research. There's a lack of general infrastructure, but is improving. What we mean by that is going between sort of the major cities. The roads, our systems are quite good. There's train systems, brand new, have a combination between the Kenyan government working partnership with Chinese entities. So that's great. They're always looking to sort of build out the port of Mombasa as well, but there's still a ways to go. But particularly if you're going to more rural areas, that's where you're running onto more sort of non-tarmac roads, which can be a little bit more challenging to reach certain places if you're looking to tap into the rural Kenyan communities. Other things to look out for is just probably because of security incidents, high unemployment rates, and corruption. These are challenges that you run into in major African countries, or majority of African countries with it. Kenya is a resilient economy. Kenyans are resilient individuals. So it's one of the things, just make sure you build the right systems and processes if you're looking to enter Kenya in order to sort of protect your investment and ensure you have long-term success. Now let's look below the surface. Below the surface, in Nairobi, that's where you're going to get your access to capital. If you are sort of quite familiar with the Kenya landscape, you might think that, no, it's still a little bit difficult to get money. The grand scheme of things, it is, but there's no better place in East Africa, probably in sub-Saharan Africa, to be in order to get investments. There's a number of offices from foreign VC, particularly European VCs, private equity. There's a lot of appetite for Kenyan private equity groups to do investments over 25 million or more. And then also it's home to all the major regional banks and national banks. All have headquarters there. So if you're looking for a loan or to start your business or to grow your business, that's where you need to go through. Other things is an advanced startup community. There's 40 plus innovation hubs, top universities, huge amount of money going into the startup sector. It's a very collaborative environment as well. There's a lot of networking events happening on a regular basis. Of course, right now they've been postponed or they've been moved online because of COVID. But once sort of this third wave comes to an end in Nairobi, we're going to see this sort of the vibrant atmosphere pick up again in person in particular. And then we also see Nairobi is home to a lot of corporations and delegations. If you're looking more at the delegation side, the UN has major offices in Nairobi that not only covers Kenya, but also the region and sometimes the continent for that perspective. Also, if you're looking to tap into governments, the representations for many countries, not only for Kenya, but also covering the whole entire region, their high commissioners, ambassadors, and those entities are based in Nairobi for that. Then jumping over to unforeseen obstacles. This is something particularly when you work in sort of quote unquote younger countries. You are constantly seeing evolving regulation and tax regimes, particularly as you're looking at how do governments appropriately tax like digital services. That's something that's been a big conversation, particularly around digital financial services over the last 2-3 years. So that's what I mean when we're talking about sort of just you need to pay attention to as the law does develop over the coming years in regards to your particular sector. The Kenyan government usually does not do something that you may see in other African countries. They usually do have consultations. They usually don't do sort of fly-by-the-night changes within it. So if a change does come, you usually do have a couple months awareness of that change will come, or even more than a year. Then other things is high cost and complexity of filing a intellectual property. It's one of the things where a number of Kenya's government services are not fully digitized, so things take a little bit longer. It's still paper-based, unlike what you would see in Estonia. And then also just protect your brand. If you are successful, people like what you do, they'll do a knockoff of what you do, so that could be a potential challenge. So look at potentially trademark and copywriting your brand and your logo in order to make sure you can have some comfort at night. And the other part is there's really a lack of research and development. A lot of people use when they expand to Africa using it as a sales outlet, but there's a really huge opportunity to sort of build out opportunities and services looking at local research and development. If this opportunity can come out of Kenya, there's enormous amount of potential particularly they see you're developing the Kenyan economy, you can actually probably take advantage of a number of tax breaks, incentives, and receive a lot more support from various funding organizations, as well as the government of Kenya. Now let's go to tackling a little bit more of the underlying challenges. I'm not going to go into all of these in very much detail because some of these have already been covered, but I just wanted to touch on a few. And particularly is we're looking at land ownership. Land ownership is a challenge in Kenya. It's a contentious issue in many countries in Africa and also in emerging markets around the world. But particularly speaking is make sure you know who you're dealing with, whether you're trying to buy land or you're trying to rent real estate from it, know who you're dealing with. I've worked with a Belgian Rwandan organization, and we were expanding into Kenya, and we thought we were actually engaging with the right landlord, and it turns out the very last second it wasn't. So it's one of the things where do your research, look into who you're dealing with, and make sure you have that trust in that realm, and yeah, protect yourself in the longer run. Other things just to point out there as well is make sure you just put the right security protocols, whether you're looking at cybersecurity or you're looking at more physical security as well with it. It's one of the things that all your vehicles, all your assets are of sort of great worthwhile to you. So just make sure they are protected appropriately. And how's the best way to do it is when you are sort of building your company, the same way you do in Estonia or other parts of the world, just make sure you sort of create those admirable cultures. And that's something we really drive home at Stepchange Africa, is making sure that you want sort of a transparent, a transparent and honorable ethos sort of permeating through your company, because that's the best way to sort of actually mitigate a lot of the risk at the end of the day. It's really changing, getting that mentality in the right realm. Some other good things to know, going off in the unique opportunity section, is there's really a strong work ethic in the country. Particularly just pointing out Nairobi. Right now, Nairobi has terrible traffic. The best way, if you want to have meetings, you have a meeting at 9 a.m., you have a meeting at 4 p.m., and then the day's done. It's just because it's difficult to travel from one place to apart. The road system is improving in Nairobi, for example, but what a lot of people do is they'll wake up at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning to be at the office for 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning to start working. So it's one of the things, you have a lot of dedicated workers that will get there early to seize the day. Also, with the port of Mombasa, is the most important port in the region. It's a country with a port, therefore it should be lower cost for you to do the import-export for you. Other thing is the well-educated labor market, home to great universities. We're talking about the University of Nairobi, Strathmore, Kenyatta University. And then in addition to sort of the good universities that you do have in Kenya, you also have very quality public and private schools at secondary level. So it's one of the things, these are some of the best schools in the region, if not the overall sub-Saharan Africa. So this is when I talked about sort of that high level market sophistication. You do have sort of the seeds in there and the systems in place to sort of to leverage to create sort of a very sort of intelligent, mobile, active participants that want to sort of be part of a successful business. Next thing is the government of Kenya's investment in innovation. The government of Kenya, to be honest, at some points over the last few years has stifled innovation. Their tune has actually changed over the last, I would say, 2 years or so with it. They're taking a lot more excitement into supporting innovation, particularly young entrepreneurs, but also just other sort of entrepreneurs that are involved in the ecosystem as well. They are building out sort of tech cities. One on the outside of Nairobi is called Konza City, where they're giving sort of very sort of fair sort of land deals and other types of subsidies, incentives for you to build out your companies in these new tech cities. Other things good to know is it's really favorable conditions for expats and other foreign companies. Speaking that from my own personal experiences, and then also from other individuals that I've worked with, spoken with at Stepchange, and in my own personal capacity. And the reason is that there's a long history between sort of Europe and Kenya. So it's you'll be welcome with open arms going into Nairobi and other parts of Kenya, starting a business. Unfortunately, with all the positivity around, just want to be a little bit more honest in terms of things. Tensions are high around election period. The members of the major political parties have taken steps to calm nerves, but still it is challenging. What we advise companies going into looking to open up is when you do go into election years, you'll probably lose about a month of that year. So you'll probably be operating on an 11-month schedule rather than a 12-month schedule for it. It's just part of the challenges, but there have been steps to remedy the issue. Then also looking at is Kenyans, they're really quick to adopt sort of new things, particularly in the tech sphere. When you look at sort of M-Pesa and sort of the rapid growth that's received and the development of sort of mobile and digital financial services, shows that Kenyans, the Kenyan economy is really easy to monetize. Also, Kenya has some of the highest user rates in terms of like Twitter, TikTok, Instagram as well with it. So it's not only sort of a particular service that you can use to sell into locally, but it's also one of the things, there's a number of channels where you can actually get a sizable market to amplify your content. And that's what I'm referring to with the social media channels. And then last but not least is success in Kenya really doesn't guarantee that you'll have success in the rest of the East African community. The nice thing about Kenya is there are the secondary cities with sizable populations. So Kenyan companies tend to only focus on Kenya. They will have retail customers in the Rwandas, Tanzanias, and Ugandas, but it's one of the things that are really not sort of priority customers in most cases. People, yeah, I said before, their Kenyan businesses tend to focus on Kenya for it. Other things is Kenya, like just a handful of other countries across sub-Saharan Africa, it actually does have a real middle class. And that's why it's really exciting to invest in Kenya. And what do I mean by a real middle class is this is millions of individuals who have the spending power of anywhere from $2 to $20 in disposable income. Do realize that's quite a large spread, but at the end of the day, this is something why I said before that Kenyan businesses or businesses based in Kenya are just looking to develop in Kenya because there's just so much opportunity and potential. Then also other things is there's no paid-in minimum capital requirement to start a business. And then last but not least, it's the third best place to do business in Africa, according to the World Bank. It sort of falls behind Mauritius and Rwanda. So overall, that's the information in order to hopefully act as a catalyst for growth of you sort of exploring and growing your business in Kenya and hopefully in the foreseeable future. So now, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Grace Muthoni from Growth Shield Africa. And she will take us through sort of her experiences and provide her guidance on doing business in Kenya. So it's over to you, Grace.
Thank you, Andrew. Hello, everyone. My name is Grace Muthoni, the founder and lead partner at Growth Shield Africa. Like Dr. Andrew also mentioned, we are a business services provider when we offer legal, accounting, corporate finance, and general consulting services to enterprises within the East African region. We also have other offices in other African countries, including Ghana, Egypt, Zambia, and Nigeria. My background is legal and corporate finance, and I am licensed to practice both in the countries I've mentioned. So I will, unfortunately, don't have a presentation, but I'll go over the legal requirements and share some insights on setting up a business in Kenya. I hope it will help you understand the regulatory regime in Kenya. Setting up the business in Kenya is quite easy and straightforward, and the government is really helping in easing the business registration process and the ease of doing business within the country. There are two options for a foreign company coming to Kenya. You can register a business in Kenya independently as a foreigner, or you can have it as a foreign branch of the international branch you have, or you can register, actually there are three. You can register as yourself, as an individual business that you own in Kenya. You can register as a foreign branch of an international or a foreign company, or you can have it as a subsidiary of the international company, but still registered in Kenya as a fresh company, which will be calculated as a citizen. And there is different benefits or disadvantages to that. If you register a company in Kenya and it's given a tax identity, you benefit from the 30% corporate tax rate. If it's a foreign branch, you pay 35% of as corporate tax. And if you are repatriating profits made in Kenya to a foreign country, you also, as a foreign branch, you also pay another 25% withholding tax. So it's better to register a company, whether as a subsidiary or owned by the individual directors in Kenya. To operationalize a company in Kenya, there are additional legal compliance required. We'll start with the work permit. And in the work permit, there are two categories. You can apply for an investor work permit, or you can apply for an employee work permit. So I'll go briefly over the benefits of both, or the processes of both. So the investor work permit, you'll need approval as an investor by the Kenyan agency that assists investors in setting up in Kenya. It's called KenInvest. Once they give you that letter of approval, it's easier to get licenses and assistance. They really help you in establishing your business locally. The investor permit, the government fees are about $2,000 US without any legal fees applied to it. So depending on your service provider, that might go to as high as $4,000 US to as high as $6,000, depending on the service provider. It will take you under a month to get approval as an investor in Kenya, and the mandatory requirements for you to get the investor approval or be categorized as an investor is that you need to show you have about $100,000 US in a bank account outside the country or within that is ready to be transferred and invested in Kenya. There is no requirement that you have to spend all that money within Kenya within a certain period. You just need to transfer it locally before you start, the work permits are approved. So once you get an investor permit, the benefits of it is you'll be issued additional 3 work permits for employees. Kenya is a very nationalistic country and there are laws. So getting employee work permits, you really have to prove that you sourced expertise and you tried to recruit locally and you failed to get that kind of talent that you're looking for, and that's usually mandatory. So the benefit of the investor permit is you can bring with you 3 key management people, a maximum of 3 key C-suite level or technical kind of expertise without any additional compliance requirement. The employee work permit, which is popular with investors that are coming to the country who might not have the $100,000 US on standby. The path to getting it is you still need to register a company in Kenya. A registration of a company in Kenya will cost you around $400 to $1,000 US. The government fee is only 100. The other fees are just legal fees and legal fees or service provider fees. So it's you can budget for about $500 US to register a company, and then thereafter, once you register a company, you as the director, you need to grant yourself a contract as an employee of that company that you have registered. And using that contract, now you are able to apply for an employee work permit. An employee work permit is a bit more expensive than an investor work permit. The government fees are $4,000 US. For the initial work permit you're applying for, it will take you a minimum of 2 months. And with the COVID restrictions, where the Department of Immigration has reduced its workforce, the process is taking longer, which is expected, but the process is also online. You're also required for the employee visa, employee work permit right now, you are required, the law has changed and you're required to apply for it before you enter into the country. And it's a process you can do online by yourself, or you can involve a service provider locally. For the employee work permit, there's an additional requirement that you have to provide local understudy that you're going to train and transfer skills. One thing to note that in Kenya, you don't need a local partner or director in registering a company. As a foreigner, you are free to have just yourself or just total foreigners or yourself in a foreign company as shareholders. However, there's some regulatory restrictions to this in some sectors like telecommunications and media. The rest are open. Once you get the work permit, you are able to process the tax identity number, which is crucial. It's part of the KYC documents required to open a bank account. So you can't have a bank account in a local bank unless you have all the KYC documents and the KRA PIN, which is KRA is the revenue authority in Kenya. It's a mandatory KYC documents to operate a bank account, but also get local business permits. Those two requirements that you'll need. Also, like if you need a mining license, you have to provide that kind of documents. That's why it's essential to obtain the work permit, whether it's the investor or the employee work permit. After obtaining that, you essentially now have essential documents. You can start operations. Depending on the sector that you are venturing into, there might be additional regulatory compliance. So the regulated sectors start with the finance and fintech, which are regulated by the Central Bank of Kenya. Need to mention that Kenya has the most conducive finance regulation. It's very open and it's very progressive, so that you wouldn't need a lot of government lobbying to get this kind of license. The process is straightforward. At the minutes, depending on what kind of business you're doing, you might not even need a license. Just a letter of no objection from the central bank saying they're okay with your business model. You might need legal advice on detail on the kind of licensing you need. There's other licenses for mining. For manufacturing, there's no. For manufacturing, there's only one other license, which is the environmental, from the environmental body, the National Environmental Management Authority. And once you start producing your initial products before you release them to the market, you'll need approval and standardization from the Kenya Bureau of Standards. Those are like the major regulators in Kenya. Other sectors like education, the license you'll start with is a no objection letter, and you're allowed to have 1 year to sort of develop curriculum set up. After that, you start paying licenses to the Council of Higher Education, if it's a higher education institution, or if it's a primary school and secondary school kind of institution, or online-based secondary school in lower education. There is the Kenyan Ministry of Education. If it's online-based, there is no regulation for it unless you want to be accredited by the Council of Higher Education. However, for online education in Kenya is tax exempt. For online education, it's not exempt, but there's no additional regulation for that. Other sectors like agriculture, the regulatory hurdle is that you can't own freehold land in Kenya as a foreigner, so you'll need to have a lease, and long-term leases are available to foreigners. You can own leaseholds directly from the government if you need large land, or you can lease directly from a local owner. This also applies to other industries like conservation, wildlife, tourism. You'll need leasehold. They are highly protected. Once you have a leasehold and the terms and it's registered, there is no sort of nationalization as you find in other African countries. The leasehold is protected under law and it's enforceable. So if you have a 25-year lease, that pre-agreed rent, that's you are assured for those 25 years, no one will come and reclaim the land. The land, as Andrew mentioned, it's a high emotional commodity or property in Kenya. So you need to take caution and sort of identify what kind of land and who the landlord is. And extra caution is to be made if you're leasing land in what are called community reserves. This is places where people like the Maasais, the Samburu, the pastoral communities are. You'll need the community approval for those kind of land. There is land that is specifically assigned as community land, which is not leasable unless the whole community agrees to it, which might get a bit tricky. That's why you need to find land that is not under the community protection regime. You can also lease land from government directly. Government still owns a lot of land, and it's available to leases to investors, especially for large agricultural projects or even construction. And this is why it's important, if you are coming to the country and looking to invest with over, like I say, the minimum capital is 100,000 US dollars. That's about 10 million Kenya shillings, which is really a low bar. You should go through the Kenya Investment Authority because they'll give you special concessions, special considerations, depending on the sector you're going through. They become like your enabling partner to access the market. The benefit of coming to Kenya as the initial country you launch in Africa is Kenya is a signatory to other regional corporations like the East African Community and COMESA, and also is a signatory to the African Free Trade Agreement, and which is ratified too, which gives you advantage if you are coming in, especially for manufacturing or processing. You are able to access all these other markets without additional compliance in those other regions, because the regional, it works like the EU. These regional agreements work like that. And if you're registered as a company in Kenya, that's you're not, the individual owners are not considered. What you need is the Kenyan identity number, which is the KRA PIN, and you can access all these other markets. So that's another benefit, especially noting that Kenya is one of the most developed African countries. So you have access to high quality labor, infrastructure, and more constant power. The infrastructure is better than any other East African country. So you'll benefit more if you establish in Kenya, even if your market is outside Kenya. The other regulatory considerations that you might need to know is that the employment law in Kenya is very strict. It's very socialistic in nature, and it's being amended every other day. Like Andrew mentioned, the regulatory regime in Kenya is very active. We have a regulator for almost every other sector. And because it's an emerging market, there is this burden to comply to the best international practices in laws. We have an equivalent of the EU data protection, which is a data protection act in Kenya. So it's quite progressive. So the regulatory burden becomes quite hefty. It's not, as you'd imagine, as a developing country, that it's non-regulated. It's very regulated, and you have to keep on watch on oncoming regulations. We also have a very strong constitution that overrides a lot of free market sort of dynamics, especially in areas of human rights observations, even by private companies, diversity and inclusion. So you'll need to check and be compliant with all that. And the burden of employment, if you don't follow the procedure properly, that can result to hefty damages paid out and claims paid out to employees, which the standard is 12 months salary for breach of that. The enforcement of contracts, it's very high. Right now, the judiciary in Kenya is very strong. So, and matters are being conducted online. You can choose online or offline, and the arbitration laws are just as standard as UK. So that the enforcement of contracts is quite high. You don't have to worry that you don't have you have a contract and it might not get enforced, so you have to bribe the judiciary officers to have enforcement. So it's quite straightforward, and you expect fair treatment as long as you're in compliance with the laws that govern that kind, whatever dispute you have.
Great. Thanks, yeah. Grace. We appreciate that. That was very detailed. And if anybody has any further questions in regards to getting a business set up, particularly from a legal aspect, we will share Grace's details after the webinar as well. So that wraps up the doing business in Kenya testimonial. And now we're going to move over to the question and answer period. I saw there's throughout the presentation, there has been a number of questions. So we'll take sort of the next 5 to 7 minutes of answering the questions that you put forward. The first question comes into from Peter. Peter says, I have a business in Kenya from 2018, focusing on how to formalize the informal labor market in Africa. He's interested in finding partners regarding financing and know-how. Guess I'll take the first stab at that. So Peter, that's why, so you have the likes of Stepchange Africa and you have Growth Shield Africa. We're here to sort of help make the right introductions, as well as sort of provide guidance on how to sort of appropriately sort of formalize and try to formalize the informal labor market and provide you with the input and guidance. So we're happy to speak with you after the webinar. Our contact details will be there, and we're happy to sit down with you for an hour or so and just hammer things out and see if we can put you in the right way forward. So that's why the likes of sort of us and Growth Shield Africa are about for you. The second question comes from Hardy, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing anyone's name wrong. So Hardy says, hello, I'm setting my standard set of questions in advance. How would you shortly summarize the mining sector of Kenya? What are the opportunities there for consulting service providers from the EU? So with that, I can answer that question, but I can pass it on to Grace as well. What do you feel? Would you like to answer part of that, or would you prefer me to take that first question?
You can take, I could do an overview. I can see all the questions there, and then I can do an overview of the various answers I would have.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Very good. Yeah, in regards to Kenya, they're sort of the opportunities across sort of the mining sector are a lot bigger compared to Uganda. But at the end of the day, it's still really non-incessant what they're doing. Particularly a lot of these deposits and the exploration is really happening in very remote parts of the country. So that's where they're starting to build out the overall infrastructure. If you are looking for overall sort of finding the consulting services for it, there is a lot of opportunity, because particularly a lot of the companies that are involved in these sectors are actually foreign companies, for that matter, that are working in partnership with the government of Kenya. So the best probably route to market is be sort of working with the people that are holding the overall contracts behind of that, and also engaging with the relevant ministry in Kenya. Question number 2 also comes from the mineral exploration. So yeah, where do you start and how do you get a foot in the door? So I think I just sort of partially answered that question already. I think the first part is actually to do your research. So if line up a conversation with us or Growth Shield Africa, we can sort of help you start connecting the dots through that research, and then meeting with sort of local third party providers. Another thing is just actually go there in country. The way to sort of move the, I guess, say the dial forward is actually just go interface with people. There's nothing that beats that. I know that's a little bit more challenging in regards to COVID-19 right now, but Kenya is looking to hopefully exit the third wave of COVID, and you can actually still readily travel to Kenya, at the present time. So it's one of the things that I highly recommend. You do your research, talk with third-party providers, and also go visit there and you just line up meetings with relevant players, such as the individuals holding the contracts, and also some relevant government ministries. Additionally, what you'll find, there's a lot of freelancers involved in the space. That simple research should be done just looking at LinkedIn, which you tend to find in terms of the mining sector, tend to come from backgrounds mainly from South Africa. And then overall, in terms of the research, yeah, good connections is just looking at the various ministries and then speaking with people that have sort of the networks on the ground, as I said earlier. And then last but not least, number 4, how well developed is the payment behavior of both the private and public sector? Do clients usually pay the invoices on time, or are there delays usually part of business culture? What to expect and to prepare for. So as Grace pointed out, the legal judiciary system is there with the enforcement of contracts, and I'll let her provide a little bit more color into that. Our invoice is normally paid on time. It depends on the client. Sometimes, as long as you can get it within a week of a deadline, that's actually quite sort of reasonable. So you just need to balance your cash appropriately. But in terms of bill payment on time, from my experiences in East Africa, Kenyans are usually the best at paying their bills relative to that. But just one of the things, just make sure you manage your cash flows accordingly for it. So those are my quick responses for you, Hardy. If Grace, if you just want to sort of wrap up with your take on those questions.
Yeah, just to echo what you have said, the majority of operators in the mining sector are foreign companies who have been issued the concession contracts. So it's relatively easy to get in contact with them, and you can rely on Stepchange Africa or Crossfield Africa to do the research or introductions. On the question of payment behavior, of both the private and public sector, it really depends. On the private sector, the multinationals do adhere to the international standards. Some private companies in Kenya also do that, but also the enforcement of contracts is very high. The public sector, on the other hand, you really have to sort of rely on relationships and visit the office several times after the invoice is due to get paid. And this is because of government cash flow problems. The parastatals, however, they do pay on time. The parastatals here are quasi-government institutions, and that's because they sort of already have the funds away removed from the treasury, which makes it they're not paying through the national government payment system, which is IFMIS, the information management system of government, which requires the treasury to approve payments. So payments from parastatals in Kenya are processed more quickly. The SMEs, if you're dealing with those kind of businesses, you also, like public sector, you have to contend with delayed payments, and this is usually advised that you sort of pay a majority part of the fees upfront on signing the contract. That's something that's as a business culture is adopted. You won't have a lot of resistance with that, especially for the SME sector, because they also know if you don't deliver the services, the enforcement regime is quite strong. The other question is on the situation with corruption in Kenya. Yes, there's still some corruption especially in government entities, but because of the constitution of Kenya, which is highlighting a lot of corruption and delays resulting to corruption, what you need to expect is delays in service delivery. They might not always follow through the service charter as you'd expect, but the service will finally be delivered even if you don't corrupt, if you don't participate in the corruption yourself. And that's because most government officers are now in contracts and not permanent and pensionable. And so performance review will still have to be done. So if you're patient, most of the culture around corruption is because people want to do things last minute, or they want expedited services. So if you're patient with the process, you don't have to get involved in the corruption. Also, corruption is driven by lack of compliance. So it's a two-way thing. If you don't corrupt the government officers, no government official will come and ask that for you, because the anti-bribery laws in Kenya are very strong, and no one wants to risk their life. It's a life imprisonment, minimum 15 years if caught guilty, and with repossession of property. So no one will ever come and demand from it. Most of the time, corruption in Kenya is driven from the other side, the service, the person who wants the service, who wants to influence the process, not comply, get away with taxes, or yeah. So it's an even playing ground if you want to be patient and you want to be compliant.
Great.
The security question. Oh.
Sorry, Grace. So we're just wrapping up the last 5 minutes of it. So if regards to just finishing up on that question, said once again, sort of all of our contactees will be shared with you post-webinar. So don't hesitate to arrange a meeting with ourselves or Grace. She's a good colleague of ours, and we'll help you get responses to that. So now we're just heading up to the last 2 minutes of the webinar. So I'm going to pass it on first to my colleague, Dr. Andrew Ssemwanga, before we let Tonis, who will formally wrap up the webinar. So over to you, Dr. Andrew.
Thank you very much, Andrew and Grace. We are moving toward the end of our webinar, but of course we are equipping you with the steps that will make you successful on your journey in investing into Kenya. You need to listen. For example, today, I thank you for attending this very important webinar on Kenya. Please remember to come back on 30th May. We have one for Tanzania. Please come in big numbers and listen. Please don't stop on listening, but do also research. Make research in a sector which you want to invest in, and then get more information about it. Thirdly, reach out to contacts like Stepchange Africa, like Gold Shield Africa, and other public and private bodies. They will help you to put you on a sound footing. Last but not least, fly out to Africa, fly out to Kenya and see what is on the ground. Check, do some due diligence yourself, and then you are sure of what you want to do. As we wind up, we would like to give you some very good contacts, both in the private and public sector. I'm not going to read of them, they are here. Please take advantage of them. Where you are not sure, the contacts are there. Stepchange Africa will help you. Stepchange Africa is there to help you in trade and export, in fundraising, in technical support, and also in providing virtual support, interim management. We provide interim management in a number of sectors: agriculture, ICT, manufacturing, health, and education. Thank you very much, dear participants, and we look forward to seeing you next time at the webinar for Tanzania. Let me hand you over to Tonis. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Andrew. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Grace, for the overview. I would very much like to thank everyone who joined the webinar. I really hope that you got value out of this. The materials and the link with the webinar will be sent to you directly and will be uploaded to our channels as well. And of course, don't miss our last webinar on the 13th of May, where we talk about Tanzania. So thank you and see you soon.
Thank you, everyone.